Well, there you have it. Another PLE for NXT has come and has gone as NXT Battleground, emanating from the UFC Apex in Las Vegas, Nevada, has concluded. Welcome to the J Area Podcast. My name is Jose Ramos Jr., and if you're a big fan of pro wrestling as much as I am, then you've come to the right place. After watching Battleground, I have a few opinions that I wanted to share with you guys, especially because usually when it comes to pro wrestling and when it comes to the podcast, I try to be, pretty optimistic. I'm naturally, at least I would like to be, a positive person, especially when it comes to pro wrestling. I try to see everything as the glass is half full rather than half empty. But after watching NXT Battleground, I'm not going to lie to you guys, I kind of left the event maybe wanting a little more. I'm not going to say the event was a failure or by any means was it boring. It wasn't. It has a lot of highlights and a lot of great reasons why to keep up with NXT. But just me, not only being as a fan of NXT, but a fan of the WWE, a fan of pro wrestling, I kind of was left wanting a little bit more. Obviously, I will address each match, the outcome, as well as what are the possible ongoing storylines moving forward. But I want to get that out of the way first off. I know there have been some who may have accused me of being, a big WWE stan, and I might not cover as much as All Elite Wrestling as I would like to. Believe me, I would love to. But being that I grew up as a fan of the WWE, I'm just more naturally inclined to follow those storylines. That's not to say that I don't keep up to date with Dynamite, Collision, and Rampage. Like I said, it's just everyone's preference, and that's why we're here on the J Area Podcast, because I try to talk about all things pro wrestling related. But for today's episode of the podcast, obviously, we're addressing NXT Battleground. And one of the big taking points out of the event, I think, is obvious. It's the ladder match. We had a 6-woman ladder match to crown the inaugural NXT Women's North American Champion. You saw the likes of Jada Parker, Kalani Jordan. We had Fallon Henley. We had Sol Ruka as one of the main favorites to win the match. Mia Yim, of course, was also in the matchup, but there was a lot of great spots. For me personally, I thought it was a great move to have this match start off the event. Anytime you have a multi-person ladder match, that is an easy recipe for success in terms of how to begin your pay-per-view or your PLE, in this instant. As I mentioned, a lot of great spots. Some of the ones that come straight to my mind. You had the Lash Legend bump on the ladder as multiple members of the matchup lift up Lash Legend and they throw her to the outside of the ring. A lot of great showings by Sol Ruka, who nailed a couple of her opponents with the Soul Snatcher, one obviously in the corner, the other coming off of a ladder. You saw also Kalani Jordan, who had a great performance by her, by the way. And if you remember from our episode from last week, I did nail it down to 3. I thought it was either going to be Lash Legend, Jada Parker, or Kalani Jordan as the potential winners. I ultimately went with Lash Legend. I thought she was going to be the one that they were going to give the title to just because she's been more, predominantly shown on NXT TV. But they went with Kalani Jordan, who would nail Mia Yim with a huge one-of-a-kind split-legged moonsault, and ultimately would climb the ladder and retrieve the NXT Women's North American Championship. I like the move. I thought it was a great choice in selecting Kalani Jordan as the first ever champion of its kind. I think personally, though, it kind of left me a little bit anticlimactic. I thought it was a great match, especially given NXT. But it's just when I saw the split-legged moonsault, the way they had built up her climbing the ladder, for some reason, and maybe that's just me, it felt like it kind of dragged to where someone else was going to come and interfere and maybe dump her off the ladder and we would still keep going. For some reason, the pacing was a little off for me. And that's not to say it wasn't a good match. I enjoyed the match. It's just the ending, for some reason, kind of fell flat for me. I think Kalani Jordan, phenomenal choice. She's been doing great on NXT ever since winning, the Breakout Star tournament and then moving up the card, being shown on NXT television more often. She is a viable choice to helm this championship, to move forward in the division, and perhaps even someday become an NXT Women's Champion. For the match itself, though, I thought it was good. I really enjoyed it. It was just that ending, and I'm looking forward to see how they're going to rank the division, if you will, because obviously we have the NXT Women's title, and now with this mid card championship, how are we going to separate the two in terms of the main eventers and the mid carders? I think it's definitely something that was needed, certainly in NXT, because it gives these women an opportunity to develop. You don't necessarily have to pressure them into the main event scene just to have them lose. They can now battle it out on the mid card and eventually establish themselves with enough experience and just quite frankly establish that comfort in being in front of a large crowd, because for some of these ladies it's the first time they've ever stepped foot in a wrestling ring, and for some of them it shows, but for a lot of them they have been really well at adapting to the change. And I'm hoping that the main roster in WWE eventually they introduce their own intercontinental or perhaps a women's television title, some form of a mid-card championship, because there's a lot of women out there who deserve some praise, who deserve some shine and an opportunity to showcase their talents. People like a Candice LeRae, people like an Indy Hartwell. I know they're in the tag team division right now, but for people like them, and Tegan Nox as well. Like, when was the last time we saw Tegan Nox on television that doesn't count main event? Overall, good showing. And I'll tell you what else was a really good showing. The tag team match. The tag team titles were on the line as the Good Brothers, the OCs, Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows, would challenge the tag champions, Nathan Frazer and Axiom. And again, going back to my predictions video last week, if you haven't seen it, please stop the video now and head over and check that out, just so you can come back here and see how I did with my predictions. But if you watched it, you would know I'm not entirely sold on the tag team roster in NXT. I'm not really as invested in it as I would like to be. And personally, I want to be the first one to say that this match proved me wrong, because these four men went out and they just, no pun intended, were total nonstop action. I really liked this match. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the story that they told, especially by having the heels, of course, keep one of the teammates away from their partner and having them build back and fight back and get that hot tag. I thought the Good Brothers, Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows, they looked like veterans. They looked intelligent. They looked poised as they were methodically attacking their opponents. And it made the babyfaces look great as well. They looked strong. They wanted retribution. They wanted revenge on those guys that have attacked them week in and week out. And they got it. They got the win. They got the W. So now perhaps the OC is going to get back together on Friday Night SmackDown. And these guys already served their purpose on NXT. They put over the young talent, giving them that chance, giving them that shine, giving them the rub. And now they can go off and do bigger and better things. It's just a matter of who's next. Who are they going to defend these titles against? But overall, again, fun. I enjoyed it. And I'm happy to say that I was wrong. I would prefer to be proven wrong when it comes to these type of expectations. And when you talk about expectations, look no further than the NXT Underground matchup between Shayna Baszler and Lola Vice. Personally, when it came to this matchup, I had my reservations. I had low expectations, especially given how the reputation of the Underground goes in the WWE. If you're an old enough wrestling fan, you can remember a time during the pandemic when they introduced Raw Underground, and that went over real well. But no, Lola Vice and Shayna Baszler did a tremendous job. I think this was one of the better matchups of the night, especially given that it's an obvious worked MMA matchup. We know that these two ladies aren't actually, just fighting it out in a shoot fight. It's obviously choreographed. And I thought they did great. I thought they did a great job at telling the story of Shayna Baszler being just aggressive in her pursuit of Lola Vice and trying to, fight a little bit of beat a little bit of respect into a young Lola Vice. And you saw she got a little bit overzealous at times. For example, she ran her knee into the announce table, which really changed the momentum of the matchup. For the time being, it was back and forth. Lola Vice would get her hits in. Shayna would get her hits in. But then once we spilled out to the outside and you saw Shayna kind of damage that knee, that gave Lola the opportunity to flip the switch. I thought Shayna did a tremendous job in terms of selling, really making Lola look good. And not only in the sense of appearance-wise, because you know how Booker T is a huge fan of Lola Vice, but just overall in the sense of wrestling in the performance of it all. Lola Vice came out of this feud, came out of this match looking way better than what she did going into it. And I'm happy for that. I'm glad that she's able to reestablish herself as a viable star, because we saw that she won the breakout tournament, this most recent one, earned a championship opportunity, and obviously lost to Roxanne Perez. Now it's up to her to start building up that equity, climbing back up the card, and potentially not only challenging for maybe the NXT Championship, but maybe the North American title as well. But nonetheless, the matchup itself was fun. I had a good time with it. I thought it was a great idea to have something so simple as Shayna Baszler, again, getting overzealous when it came to attacking Lola Vice. I thought it was pretty funny during the finish. Shayna Baszler and Lola are on the outside, and obviously they took a tumble into the members of the NXT Underground on the outside of the ring, and Shayna essentially trips over one of them and bangs her head against the steel steps. That's a 50-50 for me. You know, I think there's going to be some people who are like, okay, that was a witty and pretty smart way of going about it. Other people might think, well, that kind of makes Shayna look clumsy or dumb or whatever. I'm in the camp of, okay, it's different. You're trying something different, and I'm okay with that. And it's realistic, because every now and then we all slip up, right? We can't predict that. It's not like we choose when and where to fall. It's just, it was funny to me that, okay, she fell and naturally she hits the steel steps. Lola Vice, obviously the aggressor, took advantage of this, threw her into the ring and hit her with like a back spinning fist, and then nailed her with several hammer fists. So the referee, again, it's up to his discretion whether he wants to stop the match or not. And he did. He saw it fit to stop the match. And what they did was a good way of protecting Shayna. They gave Lola Vice the victory on account of the referee's discretion. He said, okay, we're going to call it off. She's not defending herself, just like any good official would do in the UFC. But Shayna Baszler seemed to, obviously she got something knocked out of her, but there was this sense of, hey, I'm still good to go. And she was almost upset that the referee called it off, which I thought was a great way to go, because you see in plenty of boxing matches, or like I said, in UFC fights, where the opponent wants to still go. They think, I'm still good, I can still fight, why'd you call this off? But again, it's up to the referee's discretion. So not only does it make Lola Vice look good because she just beat Shayna Baszler, but it keeps Shayna Baszler still somewhat looking strong, because, hey, I want to keep going, I want to keep fighting. And that was something that I thought was interesting heading into this matchup, because Shayna Baszler right now is in the midst of a feud for the tag titles on the main roster. We saw this past week on Friday Night SmackDown that it's made official. It's a triple threat tag team match at Clash at the Castle. It will be your reigning and defending tag team champions Jade Cargill and Bianca Belair defending the titles against Alba Fire and Isla Dawn, as well as the aforementioned Shayna Baszler and her partner Zoe Starks. So heading into this matchup, quick plug for Clash at the Castle, heading into this matchup, I thought, how are they going to handle this? Are we going to give the win to the young up-and-comer Lola Vice and try to establish her, again, as a viable star in NXT and maybe a future star on the main roster? Or are we going to protect Shayna Baszler so that she still seems like a credible threat for the tag titles on the main roster? Luckily enough, they were able to accomplish both. And I think anytime you're able to do that and hit two birds with one stone, really, it's perfect. I thought it was great. And that's only the first half of the card, because which match I think should get a lot more love, and I'm sure it will, is the NXT triple threat match for the North American title, the male's North American Championship. As I mentioned, obviously the women's title was won in the first matchup, but you had a triple threat match. Joe Coffey, Wesley, the challengers against Oba Femi, the champion, in a triple threat match. And it's very hard to ruin or to mess up a triple threat match. I thought they did a tremendous job, because you had all these elements. You had three different individuals who were able to play their role. Wesley, the babyface, the clear-cut babyface, who was the high flyer, the high energy. You had Joe Coffey, who was a technician, kind of a brawler, the natural heel. And Oba Femi, who's the champion, brute force and strength, and kind of rides in between. I kind of see heelish tendencies from an Obafemi, but the crowd is just so enamored with him. And I would be guilty. I am one of those as well, because Obafemi, for his short time in NXT, has established himself as one of those guys you have to watch out for the future. His strength, his athleticism, his presence. He's gotten better with his promos as well. And overall, the aura, if you will, that he presents when he's on television with that North American Championship. Obafemi, he's going to be a problem. He's going to be a future star. If he continues on the trajectory that he's already on pace, if he stays out of trouble and doesn't cause himself any problems, like a Velveteen Dream, for example, look into that if you want, he has the potential to be that next guy. Again, because he's everything that the WWE, past and present, have wanted in a star. They wanted these big, larger-than-life characters, hulking figures, who also have work rate, who can also deliver a good promo, who can connect with the audience. And Obafemi, he's checking all these boxes, man. And every time he's having these title defenses, they're quality matchups. Now, whether or not it's because of the opponents, the quality of opponents that he's with, or is it because he's just that damn good? I'd like to think it's a little bit of both. But again, going back to this matchup, just a great example of how to showcase each individual. As I mentioned before, it's very difficult, at least in my opinion, to screw up a triple threat match. You have all these moving variables, all these moving pieces, and the false finishes. You know, and speaking of false finishes, I would be remiss to not applaud the tag title match earlier, because they had several false finishes that almost had me thinking that Gallows and Anderson were going to win the titles. So big props to them, and I applaud that, because for someone like me who's been watching pro wrestling for for over 2 decades, it's really refreshing to still get those surprises in the middle of a matchup. But you want to talk about surprises. I mean, it really is no surprise when you talk about the strength of an Obafemi. I'll go right back to praising him, because there were a couple instances. I'll take one, for example, the Meteora that Wesley attempted on Obafemi, only for him to counter that and hit him with a devastating power bomb. It's ridiculous. It's fun. That's what it is. It's just fun watching this. And I'm curious to see where we're going to go now moving forward. Obafemi successfully defends the title. He retains as the champion. Who is his next opponent? Because as of right now, it looks like Gallus is going to begin a feud with Wesley. And it's already 3-on-1, because you have Wolfgang and you have the Coffee Brothers against Wesley. Who is he going to partner with? Right? He needs 2 individuals. And there's already rumblings, all over the place on Twitter, on the internet. Fans are all saying, well, what if he gets back together with the Rascals, who are currently in TNA wrestling? And we've already seen a little bit of hints from both sides that we might have a little bit of crossover from NXT and TNA. Is that potentially to be one? I hope so, because how exciting would that be? But nonetheless, that is for the future. We're still talking about now. And the next matchup would be Roxanne Perez defending her NXT Women's title against Jordynne Grace. Not just any Jordynne Grace, but the TNA Knockouts champion, Jordynne Grace. In what I firmly believed should have been the main event. It was not. It was the second to last matchup, and arguably better than the main event. And I'll get to that in a bit. But overall, the way they handled this and the presentation overall, Roxanne Perez, again, 2-time reigning defending champion, against the outsider, right? The foreign presence, the juggernaut, Jordynne Grace. There was, I think, a fair amount of people who thought it was a possibility that Jordynne Grace could win the matchup and be the first ever, individual to hold a TNA and WWE championship simultaneously, because of that open challenge that is in place this upcoming, I believe it's next weekend, if I'm not mistaken. Forgive me for my ignorance. I should be following TNA wrestling more, now that there are more in the mixed. But I think it was still firmly, it wasn't in doubt. Roxanne was going to win this matchup, whether it was by hook or crook. The matchup itself was fun. I thought it was great, a great way of showing not only the strength of a Jordynne Grace, but the savviness of a Roxanne Perez. And we got a little bit of color in the matchup. I think it was at some point Jordynne Grace, I think, lost maybe an earring, and we had a little bit of blood coming out of there. And she was in all white gear, so it was very noticeable on television. But towards the end of the match, we see Tatum Paxley emerge from the crowd and runs over to a championship, but not just any championship, not the NXT Women's Championship, but she has this, I guess, developing infatuation with the TNA Knockouts Championship, which would make sense. It's a new title. It's something that we haven't seen on NXT. Certainly she hasn't been exposed to it, so she's becoming interested in it. And as she takes the title and is about to make her way outside of the arena, Dana Brooke, formerly known as Dana Brooke, because now she is in TNA Wrestling, known by Ash by Elegance, emerges from the back, prevents her from leaving, and we have a little bit of a TNA cameo in itself. And what I really like is the sense of Vic Joseph, the commentator on NXT, because he refers to her as Dana, and he doesn't finish his statement because we know her as Dana Brooke. But in TNA, she is Ash by Elegance. And so for him to obviously point that out, get a little tip of the hat to those who pay attention, it's no longer Dana Brooke. That I enjoy. Because again, it's one of those things where people who know the product, people who know the business, or at least follow the business, we won't say no, but they follow it. They know that's not her name anymore. So to have those little nods are always real welcome. Obviously, Roxanne Perez would go on to retain the championship. Moving forward again, she defeats another challenger. So who do we go with next, right? Heatwave's coming up, so we're going to see which individual will be the next challenger. But overall, I am in firm belief that this matchup should have been the main event. I have no problem with the main event being NXT champion Trick Williams defending it against Ethan Page. But there was part of me which understood this. Okay, it's the main title. But unless if there's nothing at the end, some kind of angle, some kind of shocking return or debut, or potentially a TNA cameo, that should not have been the last match. Because it just got, a week and a half of build. I only say a week and a half because we had the little contract signing this past week on NXT, and then the week before was Ethan Page's debut. Whereas Jordynne Grace and Roxanne Perez, I think, had a little bit more weight to it because it's two rivalry, of promotions, champion versus champion, leader of one locker room against the next. That could have been easily your moneymaker. And it's hard to argue that wasn't a huge level of interest for a lot of fans. Was the potential of future TNA crossover? I think it was a no-brainer. I thought that should have been the main event, especially given that it was a PLE that had more women featured than men. You might as well have given them the main event. I don't know. That's just me. We go into the main event. As I mentioned, it's Trick Williams defending his title against Ethan Page. And Ethan Page comes out finally with his own theme music because he's now officially a member of the NXT roster. And they did it again. They did it again with the theme song. It just repeatedly said, ego. Maybe it'll catch on. Maybe it'll grow on me. But listening to it the very first time, I couldn't help but smile. And not in the good sense, almost like in a cringe sense, because it's like, it's new. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. And that's okay. Because it's not to everyone's liking, obviously. Hey, if Ethan Page likes it, so be it. That's great. But I just feel like, and you know what? We'll make sense of it, right? We'll try to say, hey, he's only been with the roster for less than 7 days. So what? He officially signed on Wednesday. It's Sunday that this take place. They didn't have enough time to give him proper theme music. That's what I'm gonna chalk it up to. They just didn't have enough time to give Ethan Page a decent entrance theme. But the matchup itself was fine. You saw a different side of Trick Williams, a more aggressive side, which makes sense. Naturally, of course. Why wouldn't you be more aggressive? Why wouldn't you be a little bit of angry towards Ethan Page, who just waltzes in to your NXT, to your locker room, and tries to assert dominance? And now, in his very first matchup, he's getting a championship opportunity. He's beating you up from behind the previous week. He basically puts you in position to be framed to be this assailant. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. As a matchup, I'm not gonna lie to you. I think the Jordan Grace Roxanne Perez, I think it should have main evented. As a story, this was good because you had different layers. As I mentioned with Trick Williams, he had a little bit more of aggressive side given everything that's happened in the last couple weeks. And then Ethan Page, hey, it's in his namesake, all ego, gets a little overzealous. He becomes a little bit too aggressive against Trick Williams in the corner, so the referee has to back him off. Otherwise, he's going to get disqualified. He gets in the ref's face. Trick Williams takes advantage of this, hits him with the trick shot, gets the pinfall. 1, 2, 3. I don't think this is going to be the only time we see this matchup. I think it begs the question, not if we're going to get a rematch, but when. I don't see it being a one-off. I certainly don't. I think all ego Ethan Page, something is up his sleeve. He'll get another championship opportunity. The only issue I have with it now, of course, is because you're new, because you're a fresh face, it's going to be tough getting 2 losses, against the world champion. Then there was some people who thought potentially it could be a swerve. It could be a little bit of a shock value to have him win the title. Ultimately, that didn't happen. I think it's the right move to have Trick Williams still be the champion. Because even if Ethan Page won the title, I don't think it would have been long term. I think Trick Williams right now should be the champion. I don't know who was going to dethrone him at this rate. Hell, it could be Obafemi. I mean, not to say he's going to be the North American champion when it happens. But we'll see, right? A fine matchup. A fine matchup. And then it gets to the end. And I'm thinking, okay, I personally would have had Jordan Grace and Roxanne Perez main event. But they didn't. Why? Maybe because there's something at the end. Maybe we're going to get interference or some kind of appearance by a TNA member. Or maybe a new challenger will emerge and reveal themselves to Trick Williams, but nothing came out of it. It was just straight to credits. So yeah, I'd be lying to you if it kind of left me wanting more. But hey, maybe that's the point. Less is more. They want you to keep coming back in order to regain investment or regain interest. You better believe I'm going to keep watching, obviously. 1, because I'm a fan. 2, because of the podcast. But in the sense of the show, if you're not going to give us something worth moving forward, and at least with the women's matchup, you had Tatum Paxley there. You had Ash by Elegance there. So there was your little treat of a little bit of a cameo by a TNA wrestler. That makes sense. Overall, it was a fine show. I'm not going to sit here and pander to the WWE audience and say like, oh, it was great, it was fun. It was a fun show. But by no means was it a knockout of the park. You know what I mean? It was good for what it was. And obviously it's important to remember that this is technically the developmental brand. This is a lot of people's first opportunity being on, such a production level of pro wrestling. And when I mean production level, I mean like the TV, the lights, the cameras. It's an opportunity to get everyone accustomed to it. So it's not fair to hold this to the same standards I would hold Backlash or King of the Ring. Because those, you have guys, veterans, who have been there for years, who know what they're doing, who could do this in their sleep. It's not fair to judge them that way. I thought the ladder match was great. A highlight. I really enjoyed the tag match. NXT Underground, great. The women's matchup for the women's title, thought it should have been the main event. I thought it was great. The triple threat was great. The main event, it wasn't bad. And if anything, now talking about it out loud, and if you're been listening to the podcast, you would know a lot of times I think out loud, and sometimes I kind of change my perspective. But now thinking out loud, maybe that's it. Maybe it's because of the main event. Just left me a little bit wanting more. And that kind of influences your opinion on a show. Because I was listening to a podcast and it was talking about movies. And you can have a great movie, but all people are going to remember is that ending. And if you ruin the ending, that's what you're left with. You can have a 2-hour movie and nail it for an hour and 50 minutes. But those last 10 minutes, those are going to resonate the most because that's your build. That's your climax. That's where we want to be. That's why we're here. And ultimately, I think that might have been what happened with this show. So overall, not a bad show. If I had to give it a grade, probably like a B minus C plus, somewhere in that range. If we're going 100, like in the hundreds, out of 100, I'd give it like a 77, right off the top of my head, because it was a good show. Again, I think it was just the ending, right? But NXT Battleground, if you haven't checked it out, why are you even watching the podcast? Although I appreciate it, but check it out. Make up your own assumptions for it, your own opinions on it. And if you did watch the show, what do you think? Do you agree with my takes? If not, cool. Sound off in the comments. Let me know what you guys thought was match of the night. Did you think that Ethan Page versus Trick Williams should have been the main event? Or do you agree with me that Jordynne Grace and Roxanne Perez should have been the main event? Go on, let me know what you guys think in the comments. In other news, when it comes to WWE, something I really wanted to talk about briefly, of course, was these contracts. A lot of conversations about the ongoing contract negotiations. Obviously, we knew Drew McIntyre, Becky Lynch, Seth Rollins, their contracts were up. But now we know that Chad Gable, his contract is coming up. We know that Ricochet just recently, as of this weekend, I don't know. Obviously, we don't know everything because we're not behind closed doors, but we know that his contract is coming up, and it's pointing in the direction that he's going to be leaving the company as soon as his contract expires. There's interest in New Japan. There's interest from AEW. I don't know. It's very interesting to see where we're going to go with Ricochet, especially given that he is, I believe, engaged to Samantha Irvin, who is the lead ring announcer for Monday Night Raw. Does a fantastic job. I think she's one of the best ring announcers we've had in quite some time. But it's a shame. I was a big fan of Ricochet in NXT, obviously to the main roster. I remember when he was a tag team with Aleister Black, now known as Malachi in All Elite Wrestling. And he never really got a big push. He was always that mid-card guy. Won the Intercontinental Championship. Fun fact, he was the guy that lost it to Gunther, who would hold the title for 666 days. Former U.S. champion, Speed champion, World Cup winner in last year's tournament. Or was the year before? I think it was the year before. I'm starting to lose track of my years here. He did have a couple championship opportunities. One that comes to mind is when he faced Brock Lesnar in one of the Saudi shows, I believe. Obviously didn't win, but it's good. And I think this is why it's a great time in professional wrestling when you have other avenues to pursue. He can go to AEW, he can go to New Japan and reinvent himself and just get like a new, fresh coat of paint. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's just great to change the scenery, reestablish yourself, and re-energize, really, because you're doing the same thing for so long. You want to spice it up and go do something different. And if he does go to AEW, there's already multiple individuals who have made it known that they would love to work with him, i.e. World Champion Swerve Strickland and the International Champion Will Ospreay. 2 banger of matches ready to happen. Can't wait. If he does end up leaving and go there, I mean, come on. That'll be fun. That'll be great to see. I'm rooting for Ricochet. I don't think it's going to be the last time we see him in WWE. I think there's a good chance he could come back. Obviously, maybe not soon. Maybe he signs a 3-year deal elsewhere. I just don't see it being the last time. And if this is the last time, or the last run, I should say, that we see Ricochet in WWE. It's been one hell of a ride. It's been fun. Hopefully they do him justice on the way out and they write him off in an entertaining way that we'll all remember, and we would want him to come back. But we'll see. But yeah, what has been your guys' favorite Ricochet moment? Is there a favorite match of his that you have? What are your feelings regarding these contracts and these superstars potentially signing or not signing? Let me know. Sound off in the comments. As always, guys, my name is Jose Ramos Jr. Thank you guys for joining me on this special episode, this review episode of the J Area Podcast. I can't wait to see you guys on Wednesday, carrying on another episode of the J Area Podcast. We will see you guys then.